Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So, of the flurry of announcements from the government yesterday, as Parliament returned and silly season was declared officially over, the one that is attracting most of the attention in the serious news is the shake-up of personnel at Downing Street in order to avoid the Treasury mistakes which screwed Labour in their first year. But although the initial focus was on new staff in Starmer's team, Reeves has added a couple of very interesting hires to her Treasury team as well. There have been several new appointments, but there's one promoted to Starmer's team and one to Reeves's team, which have the potential to raise Labour's game. Will it be enough though? But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So I discussed this a little bit in the live stream yesterday, but there's a few other things emerged. So, let's consider what the issue has been for Labour. The Treasury is just like any other government department, right? Just way more important. It has a job to do, and it works out the best way to meeting the objectives of the government within the parameters set by the government. The Treasury is focused on the economy. But although it's easy to say, well, this means they're focusing on boosting the economy, isn't it? Well, that's not necessarily the case. For example, what's more important? Is it that you grow the economy as much as possible, even if that means taking risks? Or is your priority to avoid risks, even if that just means you don't grow the economy very much? If you focus on growth, you have to take risks, and they can go wrong. If your aim is to avoid taking risks, then you just manage decline, as happened under the Tories. Treasury officials can't make that call. It's for politicians to decide. And those politicians also have to consider their future electoral chances with each strategy they adopt. Political direction is absolutely crucial. For example, the winter fuel allowance policy, exactly the sort of thing which the Treasury would come up with because it just solved a problem. But number 10 should have blocked it if they hadn't checked it was going to work politically, which they clearly hadn't because it didn't. Basically, the Treasury come up with ideas to achieve the government's economic aims. They don't tend to think in terms of what's good for the party of government. That's for the party of government to decide. That is specifically the job of number 10, and they haven't been doing it. Starmer has been occupied with foreign affairs, the EU, Ukraine, Trump, and he's done well in all those areas. But the domestic oversight has been lacking. For example, take the attempted disability cuts, political disaster area. But would they have been economically a good move? Well, it depends. The money was earmarked for projects which would boost the economy. But would it boost GDP by more than the cost of removing this funding? Because wherever you remove that funding, there's a local economic hit. And also, where would that economic boost and hit be felt? If the policy creates a hit to the economies of marginal constituencies to boost those of seats Labour either have no chance of winning or will almost certainly retain, then that's a terrible political move for the government. There needs to be political direction for everything. And the Treasury is well known for having no real internal political compass of its own. There's no reflection on the Chancellor there. It's the same for all Chancellors. The Treasury is operated by economists, not politicos. Rachel Reeves is easily the most qualified Chancellor in my lifetime. But there have been Chancellors in the past who had no background in economics, but were considered to have done well in the role. This is because you have access to the best economic advice the country has to offer. You don't necessarily need it yourself, as long as you know who to trust. But above all, you need to have access to good political brains as well. The difference between a government succeeding or failing can literally be the advice they have. So the Prime Minister's office has to provide that political direction. The better he does this, the less likely he is to need to tell the Treasury no to certain proposals because they'll have already been clear about them in the planning stages. But if a terrible idea does escape out of number 11, you've got to squash it before it goes public. The winter fuel allowance policy would have raised very little, yet did immense political damage. Labour have still not recovered from that despite the U-turn. They can recover. They do need to stop doing unpopular shit quite soon, though. My reading of things is, look, 2025 has been a bit of a dead loss for them politically. It's not that they need to start again. They don't need to go to the drawing board. They have actually been building the foundations, as they keep saying. That's real. But they need to avoid political cock-ups. 2026 needs to be the year of communicating a clearer mission to both the government internally, but also the public externally. We already know that an absence of mistakes won't mean an absence of bad news. The media are once again moaning about Angela Rayner. Why? Oh, she broken rules? No, she hasn't broken any rules, right? She hasn't broken any rules then? No. Okay. just because the government haven't made any major missteps for a few weeks, they just make something up. They did the same with the so-called freebies non-issue, and Rayner as well, over housing, again. Can't even come up with original things to moan about. If Labour don't mess up, the Tory press will just put out an attack story about a Labour minister following literally all the rules. But you make their job way harder if you do make moves which can't be criticised. If you make good moves, you make it tougher for them to come up with stuff. In 2027, the foundations they've been laying over the last year will have produced tangible results. There will be more housing, there'll be less aggro and immigration, it'll still be there. There'll be better NHS access, there'll be better pay, the best start centres back in places most in need of them. There will be things to cheer about. But Labour need to prepare the ground for the public to be willing to give the government credit for it. That means stop doing dumb shit and start hyping the future. But internally, it also means providing a clear blueprint for the Treasury, if one is missing as something. Like, you can't let the Treasury spend months working on a budget only to then change the goalposts at the end. This is why these new appointments could work. They're not guaranteed, because Number 10 still needs a way of gauging public opinion, which at the moment they don't seem to have. Without that, even counter-economists in Number 10 will be flying blind. Like, Starmer didn't need dedicated economic advisors to have told him the winter fuel allowance policy would go tits up. His political advisors should have been warning about that one. Another interesting part of the move is that it has injected the Treasury with new talent in the form of foundation resolution bots, including Torsten Bell. Now, the Resolution Foundation has been a superb voice for progressive economics for years, and it's good that Bell, as well as Dan Tomlinson, will be at the Treasury. They know their stuff when it comes to the economy, as felt by the lowest deciles. The Resolution Foundation's most important work, for those who are familiar with it, really, is that they research how the economy is working, or not, as is often the case, for those in the lowest deciles. To have two people who have been at the forefront of this research for years in the Treasury now is potentially an excellent move. So although I would say these moves might have been better made 6 months ago, when it became clear there was going to have to be a major intervention with the budget, there is still time to get this autumn statement in decent shape and present a more coherent message from them. I wouldn't say the economic mission has not been well defined as such. I think some in the media are over-egging the lack of economic mission. It's clear that Labour have an idea what they want to do. They want to massively increase the stock of housing. They want to power up clean, secure energy to get bills down and keep them down when petrostates have an ad down. They want to boost public transport to remove barriers to people powering the economy. They want to boost childcare for the same reason. They also want to boost pay at the bottom end in order to drive it up. Bottom up, not top down thinking. This is all good stuff, and they thought about this well in advance. So there is a clear economic mission. What they haven't really prepared enough for was how to maintain this mission when the finances got tight. It's like they just sort of hoped the global economy would either stay on an even keel or actually get better, but Trump makes that impossible. You go back to Rachel Reeves announcing that there would be no more tax rises last year, despite knowing Trump had won the election when she said it. You cannot even say she said it just in order to avoid pessimism leading to lower business activity, because they'd spent months, the previous few months, talking the economy down. That did that anyway. I said myself, I looked at my ad rates on the channel. I could see the government draining consumer confidence in real time. It was no surprise to me when the disappointing retail figures came out weeks later. I'd already seen it in my own data. The good news is that those rates are coming back strongly now. I'm not saying my ad rates are a barometer, by the way, for the entire economy. That's ridiculous. But they do tend to track consumer activity reasonably well. And August figures were the strongest since before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And the most recent Lloyd's survey of business confidence, which is way more scientific than my method, was also the highest since 2014. So the nuts and bolts of the economy are all actually looking way brighter since Labour took over. The problem, despite some hysteria in certain sections of the media, is not that Labour have made economic mistakes as such, it's that they have made political mistakes. Will these moves stop these mistakes happening? You know, Darren Jones in number 10, Torsten Bell in number 11. Well, the budget statement is likely to be in November. We should see a communications operation swinging into action as we get closer, and then another one afterwards. We'll have to see the public reaction this winter to judge. But I would say, yes, Darren Jones in number 10, Torsten Bell at the Treasury, does inject extra competence to the operation. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.